Hello, everybody. It's Liam.
And I'm Michelle Herron.
And I'm Heather Hawley. We're the host of Crime Over Wine Weekly, a new show keeping you up to date on the latest news in the true crime world.
And we're here to remind you that the first episode of Crime Over Wine Weekly is out right now. And new episodes are coming out in this feed every single Sunday.
Every week, we'll share the cases that are making headlines because we know you want to know as soon as we do. The first episode is out now wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you every single Sunday for your new true crime and wine obsession. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 55th episode of Crime Over Wine, the only podcast with head-scratching true crime stories that are just better over a bottle of wine. I'm your host, Liam Collins, and this week my guest co-host is a Chattanoogan, a podcaster, and a member of the Podnuga Podcasting Network. My guest co-host this week is Chip Alford. Hello, Chip. How are you doing?
Hi, Liam. I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to hearing another great true crime story. I'm I'm an addict.
Oh, good. I didn't know that about you. There you go. Awesome. Well, you're in good company here,
okay,
Chip.
Great.
Absolutely. Yeah, excellent. So Chip is the host of Home Where You Belong, a podcast about helping people feel more at home in their living spaces, more connected in their communities, and more engaged in their relationships. So a pretty unique kind of carve out of the podcasting world, Chip, right? Like what can you tell me a little more about this?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of podcasts about home, but a lot of those are like home design or architecture or real estate. And I talk a little bit about that, but I'm more interested in, what is it that truly makes people feel at home and wherever they live. Mm-hmm. I've interviewed people that live in tree houses and tiny houses and traditional homes and RVs. But yeah, it's interesting. You said I'm Chattanoogan, which is true now, but this is actually I think it's the 27th different home that I've lived in. So.
27. Wow.
Yeah.
So you know something about home, huh?
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to learn.
Yeah. Fair enough. Oh, maybe a whole different podcast, but I would love to know about all the different places you lived, because that sounds like you got a whole bunch of stories. So
absolutely
awesome. Well, let's kick off with some wine here.
Okay.
That's my little niche part of the podcasting world. So this week we are drinking Urgency's Chardonnay, a kiss of oak to balance bright fruits with a creamy texture that Chardonnay begs for, at least according to the label. So, which is how I always get I get that question a lot about how do I come up with the little, descriptions of the wines that I drink on this podcast. I steal them directly from the vineyards because I am not one to mess up the branding of that they have going on at all. So
probably a good idea. Probably a great idea.
Yeah. Excellent. So, Chip, are you typically a wine drinker? What's your go-to?
I don't know if I would say typically. I like wine, and I was actually born in the wine country in California, but we left when I was really young, before I was able to drink. So, but yeah, I enjoy wine, but I wouldn't say I'm a wine expert or a real knowledgeable about it.
Excellent. Well, we have some things to teach you on the podcast, Chip. Hang out with me a little more often, and you'll get that pretty quickly. So
I'll teach you about homes, you teach me about wine, and it'll be a good exchange.
Deal. I need that. Deal. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Chip. We'll jump back into this thing. Cheers to you. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Oh, that's good. Good. A little sweeter than I thought it would be.
Yeah, it is for sure. But Chardonnay, I mean, this is like the most Chardonnay I've had in my life, for sure. I mean, oakiness is there, the butterness is there, absolutely, and it's a darker yellow too. It's a much more distinct kind of yellow, which again, it's definitely not sommelier, but I been able to kind of figure out that means some really strong butter flavors in there for sure.
Okay. It's good.
Yeah, and it has like almost a little bit of smokiness to it too. Are you getting that in the back of the mouth a little bit?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Good. It's definitely a Chardonnay, but it's like a very distinct Chardonnay, like almost like around the edges. There's a little something there that makes it stand out a good bit.
Is this from California? I've not heard of this one before. Let's see.
Yes, it's California Chardonnay.
Yeah, California.
Nice, California.
I don't know what that is. Yeah.
Well, I would say, for a Chardonnay, this is definitely, if you typically go for Chardonnays, which, I usually am like a Pinot Grigio, I tend to stay away from Chardonnays. But, it gives a little bit of a different flavor. So if y'all are, or go for Chardonnays because you like the traditional kind of flavors of a Chardonnay, maybe this isn't, isn't what you're going to be expecting. But I would, if you're looking for something a little bit different, a little bit outside the comfort zone here, I think this is kind of what you want to go for.
Might be worth trying. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of something, that's a little bit outside my comfort zone, the case that I'm going to tell you about today, Chip, is very far out of everyone's comfort zone. I mean, not that any case that I talk about here is, but it's just, it's just outside of people's reach. It feels like anyways. But like a lot of the information that that we need to like solve this case, it feels like is right there, like right at our fingertips. And so we have a lot to talk about today, Chip. And so I hope you're ready.
I'm ready. I'm definitely ready.
Excellent. Well, Chip, February is Black History Month. And this month we are highlighting the disproportionate amount of attention Black missing and murdered people tend to get compared to white missing and murdered people. A young girl with a troubled past goes missing from her bedroom, but a flawed investigation puts a kink in the search for her from the very beginning. This week, I want to tell you the story of Yasmin Acree and the Lost Journal. Yasmin Acree grew up with a massively complicated background. She had grown up with her mother and her older brother DeMarcus in Kentucky. She was like this really good student, motivated, and even competed in several spelling bees. She had been named the salutatorian of her 8th grade class. She was like absolutely going places, Chip. And to make it even more impressive, this was all in spite of a really difficult home life. Yasmin's mother had a lot of issues related to drugs and some other things that we, just simply won't be going into because, frankly, I don't believe it's relevant for this case. But point being, at a certain point, even Yasmin's mother came to the realization that she probably wasn't the best caretaker for her kids if she really wanted them to be given the best chance to succeed in life. And so Yasmin and DeMarcus were put into the foster care system in Kentucky, and that's unfortunately when things start to take a turn for the worse for the siblings. Over the years, the siblings were in foster care. Yasmin had apparently experienced severe sexual abuse and as a result developed significant emotional and behavioral problems, but I never really saw like what specifically that entailed, like what kind of behavior she was showing.
Just sounds awful. I hate that any kids have to go through that, and it sounds like she had such a great start too.
Yeah, she sure did. And because oftentimes, right, like you see this kind of scenario where it's people who are parents shouldn't be parents, and so but they just don't give up because you feel this sense of responsibility and like you're torn constantly. And like to Yasmin's mom's credit, even though she was not choosing the best lifestyle, she recognized that and saw that her kids deserved better and needed better. And so she made, frankly, in my opinion, maybe not the, absolute best possible case scenario, but a better choice than what was going on at home.
It sounds like she was trying to do the right thing.
Right. And, again, we're talking about like the early 2000s here, unfortunate, things happening in the foster care system at that time. Not that they're much better these days, but, again, I'm not super surprised to hear what had unfortunately happened to Yasmin while she was there. But again, all just very important because it's about to, set up the stage for a very unfortunate turn for Yasmin. But by 2001, Yasmin's birth mother had gotten in touch with caseworkers and told them that she wanted Yasmin and her brother DeMarcus to go live with an aunt by marriage who lived in Chicago. So they did. That year, Yasmin and DeMarcus moved up to live with their Aunt Rose, who happily took them in and even formally adopted the both of them by 2006. Caseworkers who worked with the family through the transition to Rose's home described the situation as good and described Rose as a loving caretaker. But they were apparently unaware of some things happening behind closed doors. Again, the siblings had developed some pretty significant behavioral issues as a result of all of the jostling they had experienced between their mother's problems, abuse, and foster care, and now this massive move to a different city several hours away from home. Yasmin, the salutatorian and spelling bee pro, had let her grades slip a lot and had started showing signs of depression and really low self-esteem. DeMarcus had been acting out too and had apparently had some really bad manners. Rose said DeMarcus had become a, quote, real mischievous child. But as DeMarcus later tells reporters, things had actually gotten really bad inside the home. Like maybe Rose's account wasn't the full picture. Between Rose and her boyfriend Charles, the treatment of the two siblings was rough, and they had gotten physical with them. DeMarcus, who was 16 at the time, would step in to stand up for himself and for Yasmin, and when they would get into serious trouble, they would get locked in the basement.
I never like to hear about anybody getting locked anywhere, but particularly in a basement, which you hear too often in true crime stories, I guess. But, yeah, that's a terrible way to punish someone.
Yeah, well, and like the basement, is like my understanding, like not like, like the, cement blocks, that kind of thing. Like it's a little bit more furnished, put together, like livable, because, we're about to actually find out Yasmin ended up like moving her bedroom downstairs. And so it's a little bit more put together, but still, like, to your point.
Why did she have to be locked? Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like you don't lock kids in a room. Yeah, like that's the moral of the story here. And so, but like point being, I think is that, Rose, like between, what Rose said publicly about what life was like at home and what DeMarcus said publicly about what life was like at home, it's like a little conflicting in terms of like who was the actual problem. Like was it DeMarcus? Was it, Rose, and Charles being a little bit overbearing? But point being is like regardless of who's right and who's wrong here, like it's just a bad situation, and about to get it even worse. So
not good.
In 2007, according to Rose, DeMarcus's behavior had become too much for Rose and Charles, and they asked him to leave the house, and he did, leaving Yasmin alone in the house. And by this point, they had moved Yasmin to the basement by herself. According to the Chicago Tribune, the basement was just about as you would imagine. The only windows were made from this thick block glass, making the room very dark, and there were only these very small slots to allow fresh air into the room. Otherwise, it was, again, just as anyone would think of a basement being, just, really dingy and not exactly a place that you would choose to live, unless maybe you had no other choice.
Not somewhere you want to hang out, particularly if you're locked down in there. And
correct.
I'm just thinking she must have felt really abandoned again. I mean, first her mom gives up custody, I guess, or care to foster care. Then they get moved to a big city, a lot different probably than Kentucky. And now her brother's being asked to leave. So I could imagine she is really struggling.
Yeah. I mean, and easy to imagine that, right? I mean, that much, and she's 15 at this point, like that much jostling around is just not good for anybody. And it's just, you need, talk about, home where you belong, Chip. Like you need to find like a place that, is consistent, is, feels good, especially in these kind of formative ages, right?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And you're treated well.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. But the violence in the house wasn't just between the adults and the kids. It was also apparently between Rose and Charles, too, Chip. In the weeks leading up to January of 2008, Rose had filed an order of protection against Charles after he had apparently hit her. Now, I never really saw much about what exactly happened in this whole interaction or if it had happened before, but I would imagine so. But it's pretty obvious that it didn't last very long, this order of protection anyways, because Charles had stayed in the house even after all of that and leading right up to a very important date in our story.
Yeah, I've heard so many stories of protective orders that, don't work or are not successful in keeping the people away. I mean, it's, I'm sure an important step to take.
Yeah.
But it doesn't guarantee protection.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if to be fair, like, I don't know if Rose, got rid of the order of protection, like, kind of the vibe I got. And it's, again, certainly, when, like I said before, I'm sure that this had happened before in the house, right? Because, you don't just, first time that things get a little out of hand, you don't call the police and get an order of protection, logically. Right. And so
sounds like there was some troubles in the home, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah. And so it builds up to this point, and so point being is maybe logically speaking, she this all happened, it got out of hand. She calls police, she files an order for protection, and then things cool down, and they're like, okay, that was a little bit of a dramatic step. We're cool, everything's okay. Not to say that this is the most healthy relationship after that, but that's kind of how I see this whole thing playing out, with the knowledge that Charles still hung around afterwards.
And I think that happens a lot, at least in a lot of the stories. They keep thinking it's going to change, and so they give it another chance.
Absolutely. In January of 2008, Yasmin was getting by, considering the circumstances of her life. She was just about to start her first job and was really excited about an annual trip she was about to take part in through the local chapter of the YMCA. On January 15th, Rose had left for a trip to Elgin, Illinois, just outside of the city limits of Chicago, to visit her older daughter and her grandchildren, and she had plans to go on a casino trip afterwards, too. Yasmin and Charles had both stayed behind at the house that day, though. That day was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and Yasmin had a half day at school. So after school, Yasmin had decided to go to her local YMCA. She ended up coming home around 8 o'clock that night while Rose was still out at the casino on her trip. She did a load of laundry and then decided that she was going to go to bed. But the next day, January 16th, Charles woke up and was getting ready to get the day going and was going to take the trash out when he noticed something odd. He noticed that the two locks on the outside fence of the house were cut open. Now, they didn't live in the best neighborhood, so this wasn't all that alarming as far as I'm gathering, and I got the vibe that this has probably, again, happened before because it didn't really faze Charles all that much at first. But what definitely did faze him a little bit more, at least, was seeing that the lock that was on the door going down to Yasmin's room in the basement was cut off, too. Crime Over Wine is sponsored by BetterHelp. As someone who's used therapy for years, I know that finding a therapist can sometimes be a stress on its own, juggling your full-time job, your family, your friends, your podcast, and trying to find the right therapist on top of that can almost feel impossible. That's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp matches you with a therapist that works for you on your terms. It's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to one of 33,000 licensed professional therapists in as little as a few days. And because finding a new therapist is a lot like finding a new bottle of wine, if you don't jive with your therapist, you can easily switch to a new one at no additional cost. You can get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp by going to BetterHelp.com/crimeoverwine. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/crimeoverwine for 10% off your first month. Join over 4 million people who decided to get help and get happy with BetterHelp. Charles entered the basement, not really totally sure what he was about to find, but he did expect to see Yasmin because it wasn't time for her to go to school just yet, but she wasn't there. But nothing was really out of place in the room either. Her bed wasn't made and did appear to have been slept in. Nothing was missing besides her coat, pajamas, and boots as far as he could tell, which, again, weren't necessarily things that stood out directly to Charles if they did at all, because, those are things that you take when you leave the room, right?
Right.
But what was in the room was Yasmin's glasses, apparently. But because of the state of the room, Charles assumed that Yasmin had likely just decided to leave for school early that morning, and so no, dirt off his back as far as he's concerned.
I think you probably always want to default to an innocent explanation or a good explanation, not expect the worst, right? But I don't know, maybe I've listened to so much true crime, I would expect the worst when I'm thinking. But yeah, usually if you just... it makes sense that he wouldn't necessarily be alarmed right at first.
Yeah. Well, and again, we talk about this so many times in the podcast, right? Like, the default setting for so many people is that, this must be an innocent explanation. As you said, it's been fine before, so it's fine this time too. And certainly in this type of situation, right, where you have a, grown woman, young woman who, is living in the basement, can come and go as she pleases. Clearly, because if she stays, at the YMCA until 8 8 o'clock at night. You know, it didn't really seem as though anyone was really concerned about her, you know, being out, doing things until late that night. And again, even though again, like that her, grades were kind of slipping, she was still like a good kid all in all. And so it's kind of like that trust of like, okay, well, she must just have had things to do, whatever. Like, and also too, like it's the mom's boyfriend. So it's like, it's not like if she had somewhere to be early, it's not like that would be the first person, I would think so anyways, that she would tell. Like she would tell Rose, I would imagine anyways, that like, hey, I have somewhere to be early that day. And so maybe it just wasn't that much of an alarm bell for that reason, because like, why would I know? Unless they're closer than what I'm, picturing here.
Yeah. I'm guessing there wasn't a note. She didn't leave a note anywhere, I guess.
Nope, nothing like that. Yeah, again, the only thing that was like kind of odd was that she left her glasses behind, which again, like to me, you, Chip, you wear glasses, right? Like, do you go anywhere without your glasses, right? So
I try not to.
Yeah, right. So certainly, if I don't know how much you needed them, but like, if you're going out, you need to be able to see. And so you would think that would be one of the things that you would definitely make sure you bring.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're going out a little bit early. Although I do know people who forgot their glasses quite often, which is interesting to me. Yeah. But whatever works for you. Charles says he called Rose to tell her what had happened to the locks on the gate and on the door to the basement, but he didn't get through to Rose at first, and Rose later claims to have never gotten the phone call at all. Later that day, Rose returned home, and that's when Charles told her about the locks and mentioned that he didn't see Yasmin that morning, who, by the way, still was not home. Rose told Charles to replace the locks in the gate because, again, they are operating on this assumption that this was some new neighborhood vagrant who broke through the gate. Nothing else was broken or missing, so they weren't really all that worried about it. But as the evening went on with no sign of Yasmin, they started to worry about her. And suddenly, things start to feel a little eerie for them. They call Yasmin's school, and they find out that she was absent that day. And so by 7 o'clock that night, they decide they need to call police to report Yasmin missing.
I'm glad they did it more quickly. Sometimes I think people wait longer, thinking they have to wait so long, which isn't true. But
yeah, right.
I can feel that sick feeling you probably get in the pit of your stomach when somebody isn't home by a certain time and you start worrying.
Right. Yeah. And to that point too, like I was wondering, because the night before she got home around 8, they said, and so now it's like 7 o'clock and they're already a little worried. And so I'm like, interesting that, that already set off an alarm bell, even though it wasn't even like the latest that she's ever been home.
I didn't think about that. Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. But also, I mean, I guess if they already knew that she wasn't at school, like, they're probably operating off of the assumption that, like, they hadn't heard from her since the night before. And so it's been, a day. So.
Longer since I've seen her, yeah.
Correct. So when police show up to the house, they all see exactly what I had just described to you. The cut locks, but the ones on the gates had already been replaced by Charles. They also see Yasmin's bedroom in the basement and don't really see anything out of place. Again, it looked like a mostly typical teenage girl's basement bedroom. And at this point, it's clear that they are operating off of the assumption that Yasmin was a runaway. She is a troubled teenage girl, plus they had all sorts of records of the problems inside of the house, and so they end up leaving the house without taking any evidence. Not taking any fingerprints, no DNA samples were collected, and the lock that was cut off the door was just left at the property.
That doesn't sound very much was done by the police at the beginning.
Nope. And it just listen, I'm just gonna hop my soapbox here for a second. So Chip, sip your glass of wine away because I'm gonna be talking for a while here. But
okay.
It just always blows my mind how you have a missing person, regardless of what age they are, but especially if they're a minor, and you're not operating off of the assumption right off of the bat, or at least treating it as though it could be a crime scene, right? As though it could be something a little bit more malicious or criminal here, right? I just don't understand, what harm would it have done to anybody to dust the freaking door for fingerprints and take the lock in for as evidence, and you can always return it afterwards if it turned out to be nothing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if she ran away, she didn't cut the gates, she didn't cut the locks. Why would she had a key to the lock to her own room? I'm sure.
And if she was running away, she probably would have taken her glasses.
Precisely, exactly. And again, she wasn't at school, and like all these, again, I don't get it. Like it just feels very lazy to me, right? And it's just so unfortunate that that this happens so many times in these types of situations. And again, certainly happens more often in the case of, you know, young Black, you know, boys and girls who go missing, because they just automatically assume that they're just up to no good. That's what it seems like to me anyways.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if they had left the lock on the door down to her room in the basement, if the police saw a lock on the door. Or I bet he took it off, because I think that would have kind of raised an alarm bell to me if I'd seen somebody had a, you know, teenager's room and you had a padlock on it. Yeah.
I didn't even think about that. That's so true.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it was the door to the basement from the outside. So
Okay.
maybe that helps a little bit more.
Go.
So
Yeah.
so I'm assuming anyways there was an entrance, you know, up in from without having to go outside.
Okay.
But those are the type of locks we're talking about. Is you know, from if you're entering the house from the outside and want to get directly to the basement, that's how you get there. And that was a lock that was cut off, but still, like, you know, a little like iffy. I don't really know if I 100% like that, but like maybe for security, like, okay. But also going back, right, like the locks and the gates were never collected because Charles had already replaced this, which again, like not that I'm necessarily blaming him for this part, but like that is evidence that is gone, right? Because like evidently, you know, if somebody, assuming that somebody cut through all of that, those are two pieces of really critical evidence that probably have fingerprints, and they are now gone. And so I'm, you know, it just feels like, again, that deserves a little bit more questioning, considering the violent history, or at least from the records that you're seeing, that goes on in the house. Like, you would think that you would want, you know, to talk about that with Charles, you know, and make sure that you know exactly what happened there. But like that didn't even really seem to be happening here.
Yeah. I wonder if they knew. I mean, I wonder if the police that had responded there before, or actually knew about the history.
Yeah. Well, and that's the vibe I'm getting, right? And like that's like number one thing, at least I would hope so, you know, in these types of situations, that you check to see if there's a history of violence in the house, specifically history of violence directed toward the two adopted children who have had caseworkers go to the house there before multiple times. And even to the point where like they had to develop like a safety plan for the house. Caseworkers did, because there was, you know, so many times where they were called out to the house on violent circumstances, and so they developed like this plan to like protect Yasmin, and because she was like exhibiting behaviors, you know, outside of school or outside of home too.
So it sounds like this should definitely have been on their radar then.
Yeah. For sure. Absolutely. Well, it's not totally clear what Rose and Charles thought of the idea that Yasmin was a runaway at first, but I have to imagine they probably believed it like a little bit. But police started asking Yasmin's friends from school if they had heard from Yasmin, and they actually said that they had. That Yasmin called them to tell them that she was running away from home, but they wouldn't elaborate any more than that. So police hear that and decide to get a hold of Yasmin's phone records. If Yasmin was calling friends, maybe she was calling other people, and they could trace that call to where Yasmin was staying. But when they pull those phone records, they see something pretty alarming. It's nothing about where the phone calls are coming from. No, not at all. In fact, it's the fact that the phone calls weren't being made at all.
Wow. So wait, are you saying the friends were lying?
Yeah. So police find no evidence that supports the friends' stories about Yasmin calling them and telling them that she was running away from home. And when police approach them about what they found, they immediately recant their original statements about Yasmin being a runaway.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Why would they say that? Well, I guess we'll find out.
I don't. Well, no, spoiler. Actually, we really don't, because that's pretty much the end of that. But like, that infuriates me, right? Because why even make that up? Like, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Unless, I mean, the only thing I can think of is maybe she had like expressed interest to her friends about, like, you know, on really bad days about like, oh, I'm just gonna run away, and so maybe this was just them, you know, thinking that they were helping her, or like thinking that they were, you know, that assuming that was what happened because of what she said to them in the past. I have nothing to suggest that that's actually true. I'm just assuming here, just because of kind of what's going on at home. But yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. And like, again, like now we're considering where we're at in the investigation, this is like a day or two afterwards, critical times in these kind of investigations. And so this, delays it that much more, which again, every single hour, every single minute, in missing persons investigations involving minors is critical.
It's an obstacle you didn't need and don't want to have to deal with. Correct. An already challenging situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, once police and the family find out about this, their alarm bells go off and they are worried sick. And now they have lost precious days in trying to track down where Yasmin went. And they are worried and maybe even convinced that something bad did indeed happen to her. So on January 19th, 2008, 3 days after Yasmin was reported missing, investigators return to the house and collect the cut lock and any other evidence that they can find at the house and say that it was evident that the basement had been entered using force. But even though it was just a few days, those few days were critical ones in a missing persons investigation, and if they got anything good from that search, they never talked about it publicly.
Yeah, and how did they not notice that the basement had been entered using force before, or did they notice it and just not reference that? Because that's a huge red flag.
I agree. Yeah, and I don't know, maybe it's just the fact that now they're thinking that that something a little bit more mischievous happened, that now they're looking at it from a different lens of oh no, this was definitely a force situation here. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't feel right at all. And maybe, and here's my only other thought process here is that maybe when they first showed up to the house, they didn't even go up to the door outside because maybe that didn't really seem important. Maybe they entered in through the door that, that is accessed through the inside. And so maybe they didn't even look. But again, it just feels, because I would imagine, right, if it's obvious that someone broke into the house 3 days later, it's certainly obvious the day of. And so absolutely. I don't know, Chip. It just feels sloppy to me. And we see this all the time, right? With people, the officers who are called out to the scene first, aren't trained homicide investigators or trained, missing persons investigators. They're beat cops, right? And so, maybe they're just not even really thinking that way. They're not trained to. So I don't know.
It's a tough one, but I just know if they had any indication of the kind of history that had been happening in that home, I would think I would err on the side of, being extra cautious and really looking. Yeah,
you would think so. But again, obviously that's not really what happened here. And, that, whole, silence, unsurety, that went on for weeks, which turned into months, which turned into more than a year, Chip. The family, which even included DeMarcus and Yasmin's biological mother, had expressed real frustration during this time about the state of the police investigation into Yasmin's disappearance, and they did so publicly. They believed that police did not take Yasmin's disappearance seriously from the jump, knowing her background and the state of violence in the house, which both Rose and DeMarcus were talking about with reporters throughout this time, hurling some pretty intense accusations at each other about goings on inside the home through the media. And frankly, they had a really good point, in my opinion, and the way this investigation was handled tends to be even more true about young Black women who go missing. According to the Girls Like Me project, missing Black girls make up about 14% of missing persons cases in Chicago, despite only making up about 7% of the population of the city. In all, 1 in 3 missing people in the United States are Black, despite making up only about 14% of the country's population. And of that, Chip, only 7% of media coverage about missing people are stories about missing people of color.
Those are sad and sobering statistics, but frankly not too surprising, I'm afraid.
No, and again, I knew kind of anecdotally about this, right? Because it's no secret, like you were saying. But I mean, just to see them right in front of my face, I was like, wow. And again, kind of sidebar here, again, hopping back over my soapbox here. That's one of the reasons, why I started this podcast, right? Because I want to do my part to minimize that as much as possible. Because I know that I can do it. And so I mean, it is sad. And the disproportionate number up of people of for a variety of reasons of of missing people being Black, African American, people of color, is sad and disheartening. But the fact that the lack of attention they get, which is trends down, just doesn't feel right. It hurts my heart.
And what doesn't get seen and heard is easily ignored or put on the back burner. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, on the first anniversary of Yasmin's disappearance, the family pulls together a press conference with advocates where they say flat out that they believe that Yasmin was kidnapped, and possibly even worse. So as they waited more for some sign of Yasmin or some movement in the investigation to find the person responsible for doing something bad to her, May 2009 rolls around, and police announce the arrest of someone who was right under their noses the whole time. Get ready for that big test with Study.com. Study.com offers learning materials and test prep, even LSAT study prep guides for all of my legal nerds listening. Unfortunately, there aren't any wine study guides, and believe me, I did check. Listeners can get 30% off their first 3 months of any subscription level using the promo code CrimeOverWine. Again, that's promo code CrimeOverWine, no spaces, for 30% off your first 3 months at Study.com. Learn faster, stay motivated, study smarter with our sponsor, Study.com. All right, Chip. So I like to ask at this point, the wine has had a good amount of time to breathe. And so I'm wondering what kind of flavors you're getting. Are you enjoying it more or enjoying it less?
I don't know. I think I may be enjoying it a little bit more. It seemed pretty sweet at first, which I typically don't like, but I don't know if I'm just getting used to it or
Correct.
It's just a little smoother.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of liking it.
Yeah, I also like it. Yeah, and you're definitely right. It's softening a lot, and it's getting a lot smoother too. And because we were talking at the beginning of the episode about like how like there's a lot of flavors I was getting kind of around the edges, like a little bit of like aftertaste and a lot in the back of the mouth. It's evening out a lot more for me because I'm getting a lot more of a fuller kind of full mouth kind of feel to it.
I don't taste the smokiness as much as I did at first, but I don't know.
Yeah, but I'm getting a lot more buttery though too, all at the same time, because it like is mixing a lot more, like in terms of the flavor palettes here.
I need to take a wine description class and know how to better describe it.
Yeah. I know. I keep saying that I need to know more about what I'm talking about, which I feel like I have like a good amount of knowledge, but
sounds like
maybe
it.
like a little bit more. But like I feel like if I get any like more knowledgeable, I feel like I need to keep it down here for people who are listening to this. Yeah, keep it really simple, because I feel like that like there are so many podcasts out there or so many outlets out there where you can really get into the weeds of wine. And I feel like this needs to be a little bit more accessible. I feel like we need to stay on a level of like people just really understanding and maybe learn a thing or two about how to appreciate the wine.
Absolutely. That sounds like a good approach.
Learned a lot, all right. Well, Chip, let's get back to this story, because when we just left, police were about to make an arrest. Do you want to know what happens?
Yes. I want to know what turn of events happened here.
Yeah. Well, in May of 2009, police announced the arrest of Jimmy Terrell Smith. He's 35 years old, but he wasn't arrested on any charges having to do with Yasmin's case.
Okay, interesting. But why was he arrested, and why are you bringing this up? How does this relate then?
Well, Jimmy, who goes by Terrell, was arrested for raping 5 women between the years of 2006 and 2009, including 2 victims who were 14 years old, or right around the age of Yasmin. Now, Terrell is a bad dude who had been arrested a total of 6 times in his life for some nonviolent crimes and some violent ones, mostly violent ones, including attempted murder. He had been described in court records as being a, quote, brutal predator. Now, to be clear, Terrell was not accused of sexually assaulting Yasmin, but he did know her. He lived upstairs. Terrell had been living in the second-floor apartment of the building Rose, Charles, Yasmin, and DeMarcus lived in, but he actually used to live right next to Yasmin's basement bedroom. Terrell's father was a longtime friend of Rose's, and he was living in the basement next to Yasmin's room when Terrell had gotten out of prison. And when Terrell moved in, Rose actually approached them and told them that they had to move upstairs to get them as far away from the kids as possible, specifically Yasmin. And although they moved upstairs no problem, it didn't keep Terrell and Yasmin away from each other. No, they had actually been seen hanging out together a lot. According to reporting in the Chicago Tribune, Terrell had apparently been seen giving Yasmin beer and other alcohol on multiple occasions. And at least once he was seen stroking her hair. Family members had also told reporters that he had made several sexual advances toward her. And again, to remind everybody, she's a teenager, he's in his 30s.
Oh my God. And how long did it take them to find this guy? I mean, why didn't they know about this guy? Seems like that would be one of the first things. Are there any sexual, people on the sexual predators list or anything in the area? This guy was like right next door.
Oh yeah, in the area. He was literally on top of them, right? Yeah. Well, the family actually did know about him, Chip, but for reasons that aren't totally clear, the family only tells police that he lived in their building after he was arrested, despite them clearly being very aware of his violent history. But maybe they assumed, kind of what you're talking about there, Chip, police had already known about Terrell, did their freaking jobs. But again, it's not entirely clear here.
Yeah, that just seems like something that should have been put out there right away and looked at. Yeah. If it's not a problem, then you can mark it off a list. But that's definitely one that would be at the top of the list, I think.
Yeah, and again, order of operations here, right? That is, you have a missing minor. You would think that, you would at the very least,
the next door neighbors.
Look at, you would, even if next door neighbors is like Jim and Nancy, right? Exactly. You would think that, regardless of their criminal history, that you would at least knock on the door and say, hey, did you see anything? But that didn't necessarily happen. And again, specifically the fact that Terrell was put away for being sexually involved with girls Yasmin's age. You would think that that would be a red flag, but
Absolutely.
I guess not. So yeah, again, infuriating, but
crazy.
Can't do anything about it now, I guess. But Terrell does deny at first having anything to do with Yasmin's disappearance, although he does admit to knowing her and hanging out with her on multiple occasions, which again, let's rewind here. Regardless of whether or not she disappeared, he's 30, she's 15, not cool, right? And in a move you don't see all that often from law enforcement, in August of 2009, the Chicago Police Department publicly admits to a really poor investigation that led to real problems in the initial search for Yasmin. In a letter the superintendent of the police department sends to Rose, he admits to misconduct and wrongdoing in the first days of the investigation. Chip, I'm hoping you can read this line from the letter.
Wow, it's kind of amazing to have a letter like that at all, but I'll be glad to.
Yeah.
All evidence was evaluated, and it has been determined that misconduct on the part of the department members has been proven. It appears that some officers made a mistake. We'll deal with that, but I think it is safe to say that that particular incident had no impact on the efforts of our detectives in locating that young lady. Well, that's nice to say, but can you back that up with facts and information? Yeah.
Correct. Well, and how do you know that's true? That if you didn't know, take things 100% seriously from the jump, that you wouldn't have at least found a clue or two. You know what I mean? And I don't even really buy that 100%. Because again, you didn't collect the lock, you didn't collect the evidence. Okay, cool. That probably wouldn't have had much of an impact. I would probably venture a guess, but certainly knocking next door to ask questions and knowing who was living there certainly would have at least set off an alarm bell or two, and to the point where we could have gotten a little bit closer to something.
It definitely right? should have, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Well, the police department makes clear after the letter was released that Yasmin's case is a missing persons investigation, not an investigation into a runaway teenager. And that line, the way that the investigators handled the investigation had no impact on the search for Yasmin, may have been met pretty well at first, but that didn't last for very long. Because years go by in the search for Yasmin with still no significant leads, and the whole time Rose and the rest of the family are keeping an open line line of communication with local news reporters who have been covering the case pretty closely, specifically since the police department admitted that they messed up big time. And in early 2011, Rose sits down for an interview with reporters from the Chicago Tribune, and she's open about her frustrations with the investigation and her desire to find out the truth about what happened to Yasmin. And she's open enough with this reporter that she says that she's confident Terrell had something to do with Yasmin's disappearance. She also allows the reporter to go into Yasmin's bedroom, which hadn't really been touched since she disappeared, not all that much anyways. And, she allows them to look around, and she becomes even more confident that Terrell was involved when that reporter comes across something that had been missed by family members and investigators for almost 4 years. Crime Over Wine is proud to support Emancipet. Today, there are over 60 million beloved pets across the country whose families cannot access or afford veterinary care. With your help, Emancipet is changing that. Emancipet is a nonprofit that offers low-cost vet care for those who need it most. They rely on donations to keep their costs low for pet families across the country. You can support Emancipet's mission at emancipet.org. In an article published in the Chicago Tribune in March of 2011, the reporter writes about finding Yasmin's journal tucked away underneath her mattress. The Chicago Tribune ends up publishing the relevant parts of the journal. Now, most of the journal is typical teenage girl stuff, not very interesting in terms of this criminal investigation. However, there are 2 mentions of someone named Terrell.
How could they have missed that? Wow.
Yeah.
What do the entries say?
Well, to be clear, in the entries, Yasmin spells Terrell's name a little bit differently. She spells Terrell's name Tyrrell, whereas Terrell Smith spells his name Terrell. But based on the contents of the journal entries, reporters and investigators both say it's obvious that she is indeed referring to Jimmy Terrell Smith. But the crux of the journal entries are this. There are 2 mentions of Terrell, one titled, "I Miss Terrell," and the other refers to him saying, quote, "I miss his sexy ass."
Wow. So they're definitely sure that she was referring to that same Terrell.
Yeah, so I don't really know 100%, like what exactly was said, but I'm imagining it was probably referring to him living next door and that kind of thing. And so, point being, it was like based on like what she wrote in the journal. Like they said for sure that they were talking about him.
Yeah, I mean that doesn't seem like a real common name anyway, but I don't know, maybe it is.
Sure.
But when were these entries made in relation to when she actually went missing?
Well, they were made pretty shortly before Yasmin's disappearance, Chip. And so reporters do turn the journal over to investigators, but they are also pretty certain who they need to talk to next, and it's Terrell Smith. He agrees to speak to reporters from jail where he was serving a, ready for this, 100+ year sentence for the rape charges and for attempting to hire a hitman to murder the judge who convicted him.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Bad dude, right? Just bad dude. Yeah. Well, and again, like we gloss over that, but like it's not super relevant to this case, but like, okay, sure. Like just note that in the back of your head, I guess. But, during that interview, Terrell admits to knowing what happened to Yasmin, but he refused to elaborate any further on that during the interview with reporters.
I'm surprised to even talk to the reporters about it. Maybe he's somebody who likes to see his name in print or whatever. But if I was, serving a 100+ year sentence on rape charges, I don't know that I want to be talking about that whole situation, but I guess he did.
Yeah, that certainly, again, I don't know if he's up for parole anyway, but I
tried to be helpful.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So maybe, I don't know. It could be, couldn't be, but like who even freaking knows? But like, again, so we kind of gloss over this, but like, let's go back to the journal, because you search through like just knowing what we know about the flawed part of this investigation from like the very possible jump, like the fact that you didn't even like lift up the mattress just feels so wrong to me. And like, not to say that they could have even imagined that like anything good could have been under there, but like it could have been, it just feels again from the very jump that like this wasn't done the way that it should have been, because you missed like critical, incriminating evidence that like directly ties, a missing person to a violent criminal.
Yeah, that just still blows my mind. I cannot believe they missed that.
Yeah. So, on March 4th, 2011, they take this and run with it, I guess, just days after the article publishing Yasmin's journal and Terrell's eerie statement about Yasmin's disappearance. Police end up executing a search warrant on a home that he had lived in with a girlfriend between 2008 and 2009. Now, if they find anything significant from this search, it's not totally clear, but according to reporting in the Chicago Tribune, investigators end up leaving with at least 4 bags of evidence. In the meantime, Terrell agrees also to speak to Rose from behind bars. And to Rose, he's a bit more open than he was to reporters. According to what Rose told reporters, Terrell says that Yasmin had committed suicide. And although he swears he didn't kill her, he does admit that he did help her carry it out and then got rid of her body afterwards by taking her to a house and burning her body in a garbage can.
But he didn't have anything to do with it. It sounds like he had a lot to do with it, even if he hadn't actually killed her. But that's a really strange story.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not buying it.
I'm not buying it 100%, but like still, like you admitted to a crime.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether or not you actually like ended her life, like you still like aided in all of this, which like even if they wanted it, like that's still not legal.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel right. And like,
and then you didn't tell anybody about it for they knew they were looking for her for years. Yeah.
Exactly right. And like you could have fessed up. You could have said, hey, like I know exactly what happened to her. This is where she is. And like, before we even get there, right? Like you could have not burnt her body, right? And like and then that would have really easily brought a whole lot of people closure and ended this whole thing a whole lot longer ago than what it did. So that just doesn't feel like the right move to me at all. Obviously,
he just treated her like garbage.
Right. Basically, again, if we're even buying this story, I don't think I am at all. I mean, maybe that's how he got rid of her after he killed her, assuming he killed her. But I just don't know if I really fully like that.
It doesn't make sense, really.
No, it really doesn't. Now, but with that, it makes sense, and I guess in the sense of like how there's been no sign of her, I guess, right? Because like that is a real good way to get rid of a body, unfortunately. So yeah, I don't really know, but there's no evidence to support it though, regardless, Chip, and the family is not buying the suicide story at all. They are convinced just as much as we are that Yasmin was murdered and that Terrell did it. But again, there's no evidence that she was even dead, let alone that Terrell killed her. So as 2011 turned into 2012 and 2012 turned into 2013, the family and invested community members held vigils on what would have been Yasmin's 20th birthday and on the 5th anniversary of her disappearance, and other important dates to help keep her story alive and to try and convince someone with critical information to come forward. In the interim, there were hundreds of reported sightings of Yasmin that stretched from the west side of Chicago to Michigan to New York City, but none of those reported sightings panned out, and they just complicated the state of this investigation. And as Yasmin's case got more and more complicated, Rose's life did too. She ended up dying without fully knowing the truth about Yasmin. She died in 2014 from complications from diabetes and kidney issues. Yasmin's birth mother had also passed at some point throughout this whole entire investigation, again, for reasons we're not going to totally get into, but it wasn't natural, let's put it that way.
So they still don't know what happened? Is there no answers in the case today?
Oh, no. Today, there are still no clear answers, Chip, as to what happened to Yasmin Acree. There is a $10,000 reward for information that leads to Yasmin's location or an arrest in her disappearance. So if you know anything, call the Chicago Police Department at 312-744-8266. And we are also going to put that number on our website and in our show notes, too. But Chip, unfortunately, until we figure out exactly what happened here, that is all that we have for you. So thank you so much for coming on. Kind of a hard pivot break in here toward the end of like a really, sad story, but that's kind of where things lie. Unfortunately, we still don't have clear answers about this whole thing.
Yeah, so that is a very sad story. And then unfortunately, there's way too many stories like that. So it's good that you're giving some attention to it. So as you saw in the story, a media person made a difference and found a key piece. So it does happen.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the thing. Is so again, that's why we're talking about it today, right? Because again, Black History Month, this isn't exactly what you think of as Black history, but unfortunately, it's a really dark part of Black history, right? Because there are all sorts of cases that, involve, again, kind of like the statistics we talked about up at the, closer to the middle of this episode. There are all sorts of cases that just did not get the attention that they deserved right from the very jump, did not get the proper, thoroughness, to really figure out what exactly happened here. And again, it just happens in a disproportionate number of people of color, and these types of cases really just kind of go by the wayside, unfortunately, and it just is chalked up to there are assumptions made about people, and there are write-offs made about people in these types of situations based on your prejudicial thoughts, and it's really unfortunate, and it's just this is the example where there are real life consequences involved in significant biases that take place and assumptions that are made, and you just can't make assumptions about people when it comes to missing persons investigations or homicide investigations.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for including me in the story. I hope that somebody will come forward and share some information that's helpful. It's really made me think a lot about as I was listening to you talk about the story. I mean, home life was one of the critical issues. I mean, the difficulty of the home life that she grew up in, whether that contributed to her going missing or not, I'm sure it definitely added to that whole difficult situation. So, thanks for having me on. And if anyone's interested in hearing more about home life and what makes people feel at home, I would love for them to check out my website at homewhereyouBelong.com or listen to the podcast by that same name wherever you stream podcasts.
Awesome. When do you usually drop episodes?
It's usually every other Tuesday. I try to drop at least 2 a month.
Okay, awesome. Excellent. Well, thanks, Chip. I appreciate you so much for coming on. And thank you all so much for listening to this really important case. We're going to put all of our sources on our website so you can read everything for yourself and probably come up with a few theories too. And if you were just loving this podcast and you're just looking for a way to tell everyone and anyone about it, the best way to help people discover this podcast is by leaving us a 5-star rating and a review wherever you are listening right now. So make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're wondering what we have in store for you next week, here's a quick sneak peek. Hello, everybody. It's Liam.
And I'm Claire Mollet. Next week, I am re-entering the crime vineyard for a case of a tragic death with far-reaching consequences. What really happened to Alonzo Brooks?
And next week, we'll need your help to solve this one. We'll tell you all about it next Wine Wednesday on another episode of Crime Over Wine.
Proud member of the Podnuga Network.